The first encounter. A human among giants. Commander Jack Rayner stepped cautiously into the expansive chamber, his boots clicking softly against the polished metal floor. The walls around him seemed to hum with an unfamiliar energy, their sleek, angular surfaces reflecting the cool, artificial lighting. The air was thick with the scent of something alien, sterile yet invigorating. He paused for a moment, taking in the room, where time itself seemed to slow. This was it, the moment that would change the trajectory of humanity's future. Earth's first official meeting with an alien civilization. The Valorians had been monitoring Earth from afar for centuries, but until now, no human had ever set foot on their home planet. The weight of history pressed heavily on Jack's shoulders. As the representative of the United Earth Federation, he was not just an envoy. He was the embodiment of mankind's hopes and dreams. His mission was to forge an alliance with a race far beyond humanity's reach, a race whose technology and wisdom might hold the keys to advancing Earth's future. It was a daunting responsibility. Ahead of him stood an impressive sight. The Valorian ambassador, Queen Lyra. Her figure, silhouetted by the soft glow of the room's ambient lighting, emanated an aura of calm authority. As he approached, Jack couldn't help but be struck by her otherworldly grace. She was tall, elegant, with an athletic build that conveyed strength and poise. Her skin was a deep violet, a rich hue that shimmered under the lights, almost as if her very essence was alive, constantly shifting and rippling. Her features were sharp, but there was a soft, almost ethereal quality to her face. Her eyes, large and oval-shaped, glowed faintly with a silver light, devoid of pupils but brimming with intelligence and curiosity. Queen Lyra was not adorned in the elaborate regalia he had expected. Instead, she wore a simple yet stunning bodysuit made of a silken material that seemed to pulse with light. The fabric clung to her form, reflecting the colors of the room and casting shifting shadows. The suit was both functional and beautiful, as if it were an extension of her own body. The most striking feature, however, was the crest of cartilage-like extensions that rose from her forehead, tapering into two long, delicate tentacles that cascaded down her back, their tips almost touching the floor. It was a physical trait unlike anything Jack had seen before, elegant yet alien in the most profound sense. As Jack entered the room, Queen Lyra rose from her seat with a fluid motion that seemed effortless. She was regal in every sense of the word. Her gaze remained fixed on him as she stepped forward, her presence commanding and dignified. There was a moment of silence as their eyes met, and in that instant, Jack realized that this was not just an alien species. They were a race that could reshape everything humanity knew. "Commander Rayner," Queen Lyra spoke, her voice smooth and melodic, though there was a subtle edge to it that suggested both power and intelligence. The way she pronounced his name made it sound as if it had a deeper significance. "Welcome to Valor Prime. I am Queen Lyra, and it is an honor to finally meet one of your kind in person." Jack took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain composed, though the enormity of the situation was almost overwhelming. He was standing face to face with the most advanced civilization humanity had ever encountered. The history books would record this moment, but Jack wasn't sure he could grasp its true weight. All he could do now was fulfill his role as humanity's emissary, hoping his presence would represent Earth's best qualities: resilience, adaptability, and the potential for great cooperation. He bowed slightly, as was customary in their diplomatic protocols, though he kept his movements deliberate and controlled. "Your Majesty," Jack replied, his voice steady, "it is truly an honor to stand before you. I come on behalf of the United Earth Federation, and I hope that this meeting marks the beginning of a fruitful and lasting alliance between our peoples." Queen Lyra's expression remained unreadable, though Jack could sense a flicker of something behind her eyes. Perhaps curiosity, or perhaps the unspoken realization that the meeting was about to take a new turn. She gestured toward the long, sleek table that dominated the center of the room. It was oval in shape, its surface gleaming like liquid metal and surrounded by high-backed chairs that appeared to be designed with efficiency in mind, offering little in the way of comfort. Jack moved toward his seat, acutely aware of the strange beauty of the room and the subtle tension that hung in the air. This was not just a diplomatic mission, it was an encounter that would define humanity's future. As he seated himself opposite the Queen, he glanced around the room. The Valorian technology, advanced beyond anything on Earth, hummed quietly in the background. There were no visible screens or buttons, yet the room seemed to be alive with data, its walls reacting to the slightest movement, offering silent acknowledgement of their presence. He looked back at Queen Lyra, whose gaze never wavered. Her eyes seemed to pierce through him, evaluating, calculating, as if she were weighing the very essence of his soul. Jack shifted uncomfortably, but he refused to look away. "We have much to discuss regarding the proposed alliance between our peoples," Jack said, his voice firm as he tried to focus on the diplomatic mission at hand. But before he could continue, Queen Lyra held up a hand, signaling for him to pause. Her silver eyes gleamed with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something Jack couldn't quite place. "Commander," she began, her tone now softer but no less commanding, "before we delve into the formalities of your Federation's proposals, I have a question, one of a more personal nature, if you will indulge me." Jack blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. This wasn't part of the agenda, but he nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty. Please, ask anything." Queen Lyra leaned forward slightly, her long tentacles swaying gently behind her, and Jack couldn't help but notice the elegant precision with which she moved. Her next words came slowly, almost as if she were carefully selecting them. "I have studied your species for many cycles," she said, "and I find your fascination with pleasure, human pleasure, both perplexing and intriguing. You seem to pursue it relentlessly, as if it is the very core of your existence, yet I do not fully understand it. Could you explain to me, Commander Raynor, what makes pleasure so central to the human experience?" Jack was taken aback. The question was personal, direct, and unlike anything he had anticipated. His mind raced, trying to process the query. Was she referring to intimacy, to human desires? He had prepared for diplomatic talks, but not for an existential question from an alien queen. It was clear this conversation would go in directions Jack could never have anticipated, and he found himself intrigued by what Lyra truly wanted to understand. A question of desire, unraveling the human heart. The room was eerily silent as Commander Jack Raynor sat opposite Queen Lyra, her gaze steady and piercing, waiting for his response. The question she had posed hung in the air like a cloud, an enigma that seemed to stretch the very fabric of their conversation. "What makes pleasure so central to the human experience?" she had asked, her voice laced with both genuine curiosity and an unsettling undertone of disapproval. Jack leaned back in his chair, his mind racing to find the right words. It was a question that required more than just a simple answer. It demanded a deeper understanding of humanity itself. He had prepared for talks of politics, trade, and perhaps even warfare. But this was personal, intimate. The Queen's eyes were still locked on him, their silvery sheen reflecting an intensity that made him feel both vulnerable and seen in a way he had never experienced. "Well," Jack began, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty, "pleasure for humans is more than just a fleeting sensation. It's tied to our emotions, to our sense of connection with others, and even to our very survival. It's a force that shapes us, drives us, in ways both subtle and profound." He paused, searching for the right words to express a concept so deeply ingrained in human nature. "We seek pleasure not just for satisfaction, but for the experiences and relationships that come with it. It's about finding joy in the small moments, like the warmth of a touch, the connection shared with a loved one, or the exhilaration of achieving something great. It's part of what makes us feel alive." Queen Lyra remained still, her large silver eyes narrowing slightly as she processed his words. Her alien mind, far older and more advanced than his own, likely struggled to understand the complexities of human emotions. She was a queen, a being who had experienced an entirely different way of life. A race of beings who, by all appearances, had evolved beyond such primitive notions of desire. It was clear that to her, the concept of pleasure was something entirely foreign. "I see," she finally replied, her voice calm yet sharp. "So, pleasure for your species is a means of connection, a tool for survival." Jack nodded. "In a way, yes. We are creatures of feeling, of connection. While other species may prioritize efficiency, logic, or even power, humans are driven by the need to feel, to experience life with all its highs and lows. It's not just about reproduction, though that is certainly part of it. It's about bonding, about sharing something meaningful with another person, whether that's through love, friendship, or even shared goals." The queen leaned back in her seat, her tentacles curling slightly as she seemed to consider his answer. The silence between them was thick with thought, but Jack could sense that she wasn't yet satisfied. She wanted more, a deeper insight into the human psyche, perhaps even a glimpse into the core of what made humanity tick. "But pleasure is not just tied to connection, is it?" Queen Lyra asked, her voice shifting slightly. "I have studied your species for many cycles, Commander. I know of your celebrations, your rituals, your pursuits of indulgence. But it seems as though pleasure, especially in the most intimate sense, is also something that humans seek for its own sake, independent of any deeper bond. There is a hedonistic element to it. Am I mistaken?" Jack hesitated. She was right, of course. Humans did pursue pleasure for its own sake, just as they chased thrills, risks, and moments of pure ecstasy. Whether it was through indulgence in food, art, or intimacy, there was a side of human nature that reveled in pleasure without any need for emotional attachment. It was a part of the human experience that was often at odds with the more rational, purpose-driven side of their species. "Well, yes," Jack admitted slowly. "There are certainly individuals who pursue pleasure for its own sake. There's an innate desire to experience life at its fullest, to push boundaries and seek out what feels good in the moment. It's part of our nature to indulge, to explore, and to embrace the pleasures of the world around us." Queen Lyra's silver eyes flickered with something akin to intrigue, as though she were contemplating something deeply philosophical. "And yet you suggest that your species is defined by connection and emotion. If that is true, then why the pursuit of pleasure independent of those things? Is it not counterintuitive?" Jack smiled faintly, though the topic was growing more complex than he had anticipated. "It's not so much counterintuitive as it is multifaceted. Pleasure for humans is not just one thing. It is a spectrum. On one end, it's about deep, meaningful connections, bonding with another person in an intimate way that transcends physicality. But on the other end, it's about pure sensory enjoyment. Some people seek pleasure through the senses without expecting anything more. It's the rush of excitement or the pleasure of a beautiful experience that can exist without any need for emotional depth." Queen Lyra's gaze softened, and for a moment, Jack wondered if she truly understood what he was saying. It wasn't easy to explain human desires, especially to a being like her, whose race had transcended many of the complexities that defined humanity. Perhaps, he thought, that was what made this meeting so important. This was not just about an alliance between two species. It was a meeting of minds, a chance for both sides to understand each other in ways that transcended politics and power. "So, pleasure, then," Queen Lyra mused, "is not a simple pursuit for your people. It is, instead, an expression of your existence, a way of understanding yourselves and the universe around you." Jack thought for a moment before nodding. "Exactly. We seek pleasure not just as a way to feel good, but as a way to understand who we are. It's about experiencing life fully, through joy, sorrow, passion, and yes, even in the most intimate ways. It shapes who we are, how we relate to others, and how we find meaning in our lives." The Queen looked at him, her eyes intense, as though she were seeing him in a new light. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. He had given her a glimpse into the human experience, something that no alien race could fully comprehend. It wasn't just about pleasure. It was about connection, emotion, and the drive to find meaning in every moment. Queen Lyra finally nodded, her expression shifting to one of understanding, if not complete acceptance. "I believe I understand now, Commander. Perhaps this pursuit of pleasure is not as foreign to me as I thought." She leaned forward slightly, her voice low and thoughtful. "It is, perhaps, the same drive that urges us to seek knowledge and expand our horizons." Jack allowed himself a small smile, realizing that this conversation, unexpected and deeply personal, had been a step toward something far greater than just political talks. It had opened a window into the heart of humanity, and in return, he had glimpsed the complexity of an alien mind. There was more to explore, more to learn. This was only the beginning. "I think we've only just scratched the surface, Your Majesty," he said softly, his voice filled with a new sense of respect and curiosity. Queen Lyra's silver eyes gleamed, and for the first time since their meeting began, there was a hint of something more, a spark of genuine interest in the unknown. "Indeed, Commander, and I look forward to uncovering more. Beyond the surface, unraveling the depths of connection." The tension in the room had shifted. The weight of their earlier conversation hung in the air like a delicate thread, stretching between Commander Jack Rayner and Queen Lyra, the Valorian ambassador. What began as a diplomatic exchange had evolved into something far more profound, an exploration of what it meant to be alive, to connect, to feel. Jack couldn't help but marvel at how a simple question about human pleasure had unfolded into a dialogue about existence itself. Queen Lyra leaned back in her chair, her violet skin almost glowing in the ambient light. She seemed deep in thought, her silver eyes scanning the room as if searching for something beyond its walls. Her tentacles, which had remained still during their previous conversation, now flicked slightly, their tips brushing the air with an almost imperceptible grace. There was an elegance in her movements that Jack found both mesmerizing and unsettling, as if every motion had been meticulously crafted over millennia. "So," Jack said, breaking the silence, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity, "if pleasure is something that drives humans, what about your species, Your Majesty? I'm sure you must have your own concepts of satisfaction, connection, and fulfillment." Queen Lyra's gaze shifted back to him, her eyes locking with his in a way that felt almost hypnotic. For a moment, Jack wondered whether she was reading his thoughts or simply studying him with a focus that transcended any human understanding of gaze. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to speak, but then she paused, as though weighing the right words to say. "You are correct, Commander," she said at last, her voice smooth and deliberate. "Pleasure is not something foreign to us, but the Valorian understanding of it is different." She leaned forward, her presence suddenly more intense, commanding the room's energy. "We are a species that values knowledge above all else. We are driven by the need to learn, to explore the limits of our understanding. Our form of satisfaction lies in uncovering the unknown, be it through scientific discovery, philosophical exploration, or even the exploration of other civilizations." Jack listened intently, his interest piqued. He had anticipated that the Valorians would possess a culture grounded in intellect and logic, but hearing it from Queen Lyra herself gave him a new perspective. It wasn't just that they valued knowledge. It was that knowledge itself was the cornerstone of their existence. They derived fulfillment not from pleasure in the way humanity understood it, but from the continuous expansion of their intellect, the unraveling of mysteries that lay just beyond their reach. But Queen Lyra continued, her eyes narrowing slightly as she spoke, "There are, of course, areas where pleasure intersects with our pursuit of knowledge. We Valorians have mastered the art of intellectual intimacy, a connection between minds that transcends the limitations of physicality. We share thoughts, emotions, and experiences in a way that is both personal and communal. It is an experience unlike anything I've ever encountered with another species." Jack was taken aback. He had heard of telepathic or mind-linking races before, but this sounded different. The way Queen Lyra described it made it seem as if the Valorians had evolved a unique form of connection, one that didn't rely on the senses, but on pure, raw intellect. He could feel the weight of her words as she spoke them, a depth of understanding that he couldn't quite grasp yet. Intellectual intimacy, Jack echoed. How does that work, exactly? A slight smile tugged at the corner of Queen Lyra's lips, a gesture that softened the otherwise imperious expression on her face. It's difficult to explain, but I will try, she said, her voice taking on a thoughtful tone. Imagine being able to share every thought, every emotion, every sensation with another being. Not through words, but through a direct connection of consciousness. It's as though the barriers between individuals dissolve, and you can truly understand the other, without filter, without interpretation. It's not about physical pleasure, but the merging of minds, the fusion of intellect and emotion. Jack's mind raced to comprehend what she was saying. It sounded almost impossible, like something straight out of science fiction. The idea of a species being able to share their innermost thoughts and feelings directly, without the need for language or physical touch, was both fascinating and intimidating. Was it even possible for humans to achieve such a level of connection? And if it was, what would that mean for their understanding of intimacy, connection, and even power? Do you share this intellectual intimacy with everyone? Jack asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Or is it something that's reserved for select individuals? Queen Lyra's expression became more enigmatic, and for the first time, Jack noticed a flicker of vulnerability behind her regal demeanor. She paused, her eyes looking far off into the distance, as though contemplating the depths of her own experience. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, almost introspective. Intellectual intimacy, as you call it, is a gift that we give to only a select few. It is not something that we take lightly, for it is a bond unlike any other. To share your mind with another is to give them a piece of your very essence, your deepest thoughts, your most private desires. It is a connection that cannot be undone once it is formed. Her eyes met his once again, this time with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him. It is not an experience to be entered into lightly, Commander. It requires trust beyond anything you can imagine. The weight of her words hung in the air, and Jack felt a surge of empathy for the Valorians. Their pursuit of knowledge and connection was not just a cultural endeavor, it was an existential need. They had no need for the same kind of physical intimacy that humans craved. Instead, they sought a deeper intellectual connection, one that transcended physical form. It was a level of emotional and mental intimacy that was so intense, so consuming, that it changed everything about their relationships. But, Your Majesty, Jack said cautiously, what happens if this bond is broken? What happens when trust is betrayed? Queen Lyra's eyes darkened, and for the briefest moment, Jack saw a flicker of something. Pain, perhaps, flash across her face. She didn't speak immediately, her gaze turning inward, as if reflecting on a memory that she had long since buried. When she finally answered, her voice was heavy with unspoken sorrow. The consequences are profound. To lose that bond, to have your mind torn from another's, is to experience a kind of loss that is difficult to describe. It's a rupture in the very fabric of your being, an emptiness that lingers long after the connection has been severed. It is not just emotional, it is physical. The body feels the absence of the mind, and the mind feels the absence of the body. It is a pain unlike any other. Jack swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in his chest. What she described was not unlike the heartache that humans felt when they lost someone they loved. But to have that loss be both mental and physical, to experience it as a tearing apart of one's very essence, was something he couldn't quite fathom. It was a profound kind of connection, one that humans had never truly known. You see, Commander, Queen Lyra continued, her voice softening, this is why we are so careful with the bonds we form. Our connections are not casual. They are not fleeting. They are permanent. Jack nodded slowly, his mind reeling from the complexity of what he had just learned. The Valorians were not merely a species of intellectuals. They were a species who had evolved to understand and value a kind of connection that humanity had yet to fully comprehend. They were a people who could intertwine their minds, merging their thoughts and experiences in a way that transcended the limitations of the physical world. "So you don't just seek knowledge for the sake of power," Jack said thoughtfully. "You seek it for the sake of connection, to understand each other on a level that we can't even begin to grasp."